Well, I do see that as a challenge to his omnipotence, because that doesn't seem like a logical contradiction in the same way. It seems like a physical contradiction, but not a logical one.
This scientist gets pushed to answer a fundamental question about God's power in creation that I want you to hear. And at the end, I'll give you my 2 cents, so stick around.
That in our current model would lead to a big crunch, but because God is God, he can create that universe nonetheless and avoid a big crunch somehow. Or is he constrained by the constant of gravity and what he can create?
I think I see where you're going. I think God is a God of order. And that meant that in any universe, God would choose to have matter and energy follow orderly laws.
Mm-hmm.
We happen to have a set of those. They might have been otherwise. We haven't talked about whether you could come up with a completely different universe where gravity was an inverse cube instead of an inverse square.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of makes my head hurt. But within the nature of the laws that seem in this universe to govern matter and energy, if God is a God who's interested in something complex, and let's come back to my faith here, God is also a God of love. God wants to have creatures that God can have relationship with, and that is going to guide the decision-making then about what kind of universe will achieve that goal. I don't think it's constrained by the fact that God wants to love his creatures. That's who he is. And if that's the case, I don't know that it's constraining him in terms of physics to choose the right parameters to make that happen. It's a means to the end. The end is what mattered.
But he couldn't have got that same outcome through different parameters. That's the constraint that I'm talking about.
Unless you change the laws also, and I don't know how you would do that. If you're going to stick with the laws we've got and just change one constant, gravity, and expect that to end up with complexity, it won't work.
Even for God. Even God couldn't make that happen.
You know, this sort of feels like, well, God could decide 2 + 2 can be 5. And that
Right. So but that's what I'm asking is are these fundamental constants something like, laws of logic, like 2 and 2 is 5, in which case, because if I ask a believer in God, do you think that God is constrained by the laws of logic? Oftentimes they say, in a sense, yes, but that's not really a problem because these are just the laws of logic. What I'm asking is, are things like the strong and weak nuclear force and the strength of gravity like the laws of logic, and that they plausibly constrain God in the way that the laws of logic might? That seems to me a really unusual thing. Like when someone says, God couldn't make 2 + 2 = 5, I don't see that as a challenge to his omnipotence, because it's logically impossible. That kind of thing, like a four-sided triangle, he can't create that because it literally has no referent. It's not a thing. God can do all things. Four-sided triangles just aren't things. And so I totally understand that. But if it's, well, God couldn't create a life-permitting universe in which everything was the same except for gravity being 2 times as strong, he couldn't have done that. Well, I do see that as a challenge to his omnipotence, because that doesn't seem like a logical contradiction in the same way. It seems like a physical contradiction, but not a logical one.
I guess the other factor here that we haven't said explicitly is that God apparently is interested in nature following order. And the fact that there are those equations governing matter and energy, they didn't have to be there. But if you'll take as a given that God is interested in order of nature, and also that God is interested in having relationship with complicated creatures like us, then I think the only means to that end is to have that gravity constant in our universe be what it is. And so, I guess you could say there's a constraint there because otherwise God's goals are not achieved.
We have to ask ourselves, why did God even create anything at all? I mean, if he's perfect, he has everything he wants and needs, namely himself, why would he want to go create finite physical beings and structures out there in the universe? And knowing that he's going to have to become man and actually die for these wretched beings that rebel against him. Or why didn't he just create robots that do exactly what he says and have no free will, right? The man in the clip said it best: God is constrained by love. The Bible even says God is love itself, like true love. That's what God is. And you can't love without having an object or focus of your love. This is a massive argument for the Trinity, that God exists in three persons, that the Father may love the Son may love the Father, and the Spirit is like this interconnection between the two of them. And so God as love loves himself in three persons, but wants that love to expand and go beyond just that. So he creates spiritual beings, i.e. angels, and physical beings, i.e. human beings, that he can then love. And then the next level of that is not just have an object of love, but that object to love him in return willingly and freely without force or constraint. And listening to this conversation was a revelation to me that all of the physics, all of the laws of gravity and science actually are for the reason of love, and for God to love and his creatures to love him in return. All of it. Why is there something rather than nothing? Because God chose to create so he may love, and those objects may love him in return willingly. Everything in the Bible points to love. Not this superficial Valentine's Day love, but actual, eternal, lasting love. That is the reason why you and I exist, to be loved by God and to love him in return. You got to think about this, y'all. Do you want your children to obey you? I think most would say yes. But what would you like better? Your child to obey you out of love and respect for you, or your child to obey you out of fear and worry? God could care less if his creation obeyed him without love. We are to obey him out of love. And when we get to know God more, when we study about the Lord in his word, when we experience him in prayer, when we see him out there in creation, our hearts grow more in love with him, because we get to experience who he really is. A lot of people, maybe you, maybe other people, don't have such a love for God because you really don't know the true God. You've had a different God painted to you and fed to you, and you don't know the fullness of him. Look, we've all been there. I've been there in many ways. However, the more I've grown in the actual person of God, knowing who he is, my life has been transformed more and more, and I actually love him more. So be encouraged. The next time you see physics in operation, next time you hear about the laws of science that we can see and study, next time you look up at the stars, know this, that all of that was created so that God could love you and you could love God. God bless you. I'll see you in the next one. As you may know, I'm a busy guy. I'm a husband, a father. I run a business. I own a 32-acre property out in the country. I want to do those things that are going to give me more strength and ability to do what I feel like God has called me to do. And using this red light therapy device from Cyto LED has made a major impact. For years, I've been a pretty light sleeper, and I would wake up 3, sometimes 4 times in the night. And since using this device before I go to bed, I'm literally sleeping deeper and longer every single night. And the best part, it's so easy. I mean, I literally just sit in front of it and I spend time with the Lord while the cells of my body are receiving beneficial red and near infrared light. So if you're a health nut like me, I encourage you, get one of these devices from Cyto LED. It will impact your life, just like it has for me. And if you use my promo code below, you'll get a significant discount on your order. I'm sold on it, and I encourage you to be sold on it too.